The ink on the seven-figure contract was still wet. But it wasn't a partnership I was signing. It was a verdict. It had been delivered months ago. Not in a boardroom, but across the polished mahogany of a cavernous dining room, served cold between the appetizer and the main course. A chandelier dripped crystals like frozen tears overhead, casting a sterile unforgiving light on the scene below. My daughter, Anya, her face glowing with the kind of pure love that could light up a city, had just introduced me to her future father-in-law. His name was Richard Thorne, and he looked at me not as a person, but as an architect looks at a condemned building. His handshake was brief and limp, his eyes sweeping over my simple but elegant dress with a forensic disinterest before dismissing me entirely. He was the king of Thorne Construction, a regional titan who built skyscrapers from glass and steel. And I was, in his world, something to be demolished. Anya tells me you're in home management services, he said, repeating the words slowly, as if they were a foreign, distasteful substance in his mouth. He made it sound like I organized Tupperware parties for pocket money. I simply nodded. My smile, a carefully constructed mask of maternal warmth. My hand found Anya's under the heavy damask tablecloth and gave it a gentle squeeze. Her fiancé, Leo, a kind-hearted engineer with a warm smile and none of his father's predatory stillness, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A flush of embarrassment crept up his neck. It must have been a struggle. Richard continued, ignoring his son's discomfort as he swirled a blood-red vintage in his glass. Raising a child alone, admirable, in its own primitive way. But you won't have to worry any longer. Leo will provide Anya with a life of security. And by extension, you will also be taken care of. The implication was a physical blow. I was a charity case, a stray his son had brought home, and he was the magnanimous benefactor offering me a scrap from his gilded table. My own hand, hidden from view, tightened around the stem of my water goblet. My knuckles turned white. I focused on the pressure. The cold glass, a small, sharp anchor in a swirling sea of rage. He lit a cigar, the smoke pluming around his perfectly coiffed silver hair like a toxic crown. It's interesting, this trend of women starting businesses from their kitchen tables, he mused, looking at the far wall. I've actually been researching a local company myself. A potential acquisition. Piper Services. Ever heard of it? He didn't wait for an answer. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird in a cage of my own making. It was started by some housewife who got lucky in a booming market. My analysts have looked at the books. The revenue is surprisingly robust. But the financials are a complete joke. Pathetic profit margins. Undercat % last quarter. Leo tried to interject, his face pale. Dad, their business model is different. They invest in sentiment. Richard cut him off, his voice like chipping ice. I've seen the reports. They are hemorrhaging cash on excessive employee health care, paid family leave, and subsidized training. All heart, no head. A classic case of emotional leadership. He turned his gaze on me, his eyes cold and assessing. If I were in charge, I'd triple the revenue in a single fiscal year. I would slash the sentimental costs, trim the operational fat, and optimize for pure profit. The founder would probably cry about it. Women are emotional. After all, but she'd thank me when she saw the numbers on the buyout check. It took a long, satisfied drag from his cigar, the tip glowing like a dragon's eye in the dim light. That's the difference. You see? We men build empires with cold, hard logic. They run businesses like a community bake sale. The drive home was a cocoon of tense silence. Leo drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Anya sat beside him, Her earlier radiance dimmed to a faint, worried flicker. I sat in the back, the city lights smearing across the window, each one a blur of unfocused anger. Leo kept murmuring apologies, his words swallowed by the car's quiet hum. I'm so sorry. Vin. I had no idea he was going to. I never should have. I waved a hand dismissively, though the gesture felt heavy, disconnected from my body. It's not your fault. Leo. Don't worry about it. Ali. I would worry about it. I would let it fester and sharpen itself into a weapon inside me. When we reached my small, comfortable house a world away from the cold marble mausoleum Richard Thorne inhabited, I hugged them both. Everything is fine, I told Anya, stroking her hair. He was just having a bad day. She knew it was more than that. But she nodded, wanting to believe me. After they left, I locked the door and leaned against it, the facade of calm finally crumbling. The memory of Richard's smug, dismissive face was seared into my mind. Some housewife who got lucky. The insult echoed in the quiet house. And it wasn't just an attack on my present, it was a desecration of my past. My mind flew back 16 years. To another life. Another me. To the day the police called and the world fractured into a million pieces. My husband, Ben, was gone. Killed instantly in a collision on the interstate. I was 32. A full-time homemaker. And I was suddenly adrift in a sea of funeral arrangements, insurance forms, and a mortgage that now looked like an insurmountable mountain. The life insurance was a pittance after everything was settled. I remember staring at our 6-year-old daughter, her eyes wide with a question she didn't know how to ask. What happens now, in that moment? A promise was forged in the fire of my grief. I would protect her. I would build a fortress around her future. Brick by painful brick. The first bricks were laid in darkness. A 5 A.M. janitorial job in a downtown office building. The smell of industrial cleaner clinging to me as I returned home just before Anya woke. Then, a part-time shift at a supermarket. The endless beeping of the cash register, a metronome for my exhaustion. At night, after Anya was asleep, I did data entry from our tiny kitchen table, my eyes burning as I typed until 2 A.M. 4 hours of sleep became a luxury. There were nights I'd fall into bed, my body screaming in protest, only to be woken by Anya's small voice saying, "Good job today, Mommy." That was my fuel. That was my reason. Piper Services wasn't a lucky break. It was born from calloused hands and a mother's desperate blank, unyielding love. It was built with my co-founder Sandra, another single mother who knew what it meant to fight for every inch. It was a sanctuary for women like us, a testament to our resilience. And Richard Thorne had spat on all of it. Returning to the present, the tremor in my hands was gone, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. He thought my smile was acceptance. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I walked into my home office, the small room where an empire of quiet competence had been built. I powered on my computer and navigated to our client database, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I pulled up the master file for Thorne Construction. It was all there. Years of contracts, service agreements, and performance reviews. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for the truth. And I found it, glowing on the screen. An email from one of Richard's top project managers, praising my team for their unparalleled efficiency and professionalism during a crisis cleanup that had saved them from a massive penalty fee. A detailed report, co-signed by 3 of his department heads, commending Piper Services for its proactive solutions and exemplary staff conduct. And the crown jewel, a formal letter of commendation for our work on their flagship skyscraper project, the very building that had made Richard Thorne a local legend. I printed each document. The hum of the machine, a quiet battle cry in the stillness of the night. The papers felt heavy in my hand. Not with the weight of paper, but of proof. This was my evidence. This was my voice. He wanted to talk about business with no emotion. Fine. We would talk business. The wedding was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, a space designed to showcase the full weight of the Thorne family's status, a sea of crystal and white roses reflected in polished marble floors. On one side of the aisle sat a veritable who's who of the regional elite politicians, bankers, and industry titans, all members of Richard Thorne's court. On our side sat my small, a fiercely loyal circle, my business partner Sandra, a few of my most senior employees, and my closest friends. The contrast was stark. A physical map of the class divide Richard so clearly revered. But I felt no shame. All that mattered was the radiant woman walking down the aisle. Anya was breathtaking in her white gown, a vision of hope and happiness. As I watched her take Leo's hand, my heart swelled with a love so fierce. It was almost painful. The little girl whose tears I had dried and whose future I had clawed into existence was now a bride. All of it. I thought, all the hardship was worth it for this moment. After the ceremony, the reception began. The toasts were made. The champagne flowed. And then the master of ceremonies invited the father of the groom to say a few words. Richard Thorne rose from his seat, basking in the attention. He moved to the podium with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. He began with polished pleasantries, thanking his esteemed guests for joining them. Then, the velvet glove came off. To be perfectly honest, he began, a conspiratorial smile playing on his lips. Like any father, I once hoped my son would marry someone from a family of more well-matched standing. A young lady from a traditional, distinguished background. A murmur rippled through the room. Anya's smile faltered. However, Richard continued, raising a benevolent hand. It is a parent's duty to respect his son's choices. And it is clear that Leo loves Anya deeply. And who could blame him? He gestured toward the head table. Anya is a beautiful, kind young woman. To rise up from the unfortunate circumstances of being raised by a single mother and capture the heart of a man like my son, that is no small feat. It shows a certain survival instinct that women raised in comfort often lack. His words were a series of calculated detonations. I saw Leo's face go pale, his hand tightening on Anya's. Tears began to well in my daughter's eyes, threatening to spill down her cheeks. Of course, I mean that as a compliment, Richard said smoothly, his gaze sweeping the silent room. A woman who has known hardship understands the true value of a good man. And Ms. Piper, he said, turning his attention to me, his voice oozing false pity. You raised your daughter into a fine woman all on your own. I'm sure your work in domestic services must have been difficult. But there is no shame in any honest labor. You should be proud. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turn to me. I met his gaze and held it. My face a placid mask. In my clutch, my fingers rested on the cool paper of the file I had brought. Then came the final, devastating blow. And that is why today is so beautiful. From this day forward, Anya, and you as well, Ms. Piper, are members of the Thorne family. You no longer need to struggle. Matt will take good care of you. And we, too, will support you. Think of it as a new beginning. A chance to finally live with ease. In a way, this marriage is proof that love can transcend social barriers. It is a beautiful story. He made it sound like we were refugees. He was magnanimously rescuing. He portrayed his son not as a partner in a marriage, but as a benefactor in a charity case. He had painted us as disparate social climbers, saved by his family's generosity. In front of everyone who mattered in his world, he raised his glass. A toast. To my son, Matt, and to Anya. May their love continue to overcome all obstacles. The applause was scattered and uncertain. Richard returned to his seat, smug and triumphant. He had established the narrative. He had put us in our place. Anya was openly crying now, her shoulders shaking. Leo was whispering frantically to her, his face a mask of horror and shame. The MC, sensing the disaster, quickly moved to the microphone. And now, he announced, his voice a little too loud, we would like to invite the mother of the bride, Ms. Vinna Piper, to say a few words. A hush fell over the room as I rose from my seat. I felt Anya's tear-filled eyes on me. A silent plea. I gave her a small, reassuring nod before making my way to the podium. My steps were measured, unhurried. I placed my small clutch on the lectern and took the microphone. My hand steady. All eyes were on the grieving mother. The charity case. The woman who had just been so thoroughly and publicly put in her place. They were expecting tears. Or perhaps a flustered, mumbled, "Thank you." They were not expecting a verdict. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and calm, carrying easily through the silent ballroom. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate what is the happiest day of my daughter's life." I looked at Anya and Leo, a genuine, warm smile gracing my lips. Seeing you two together brings a joy to my heart that words cannot truly express. I let that sincere sentiment hang in the air for a moment, a stark contrast to the venom that had preceded it. As Richard mentioned, I raised Anya on my own from the time she was 6 years old. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Richard Thorne. He is right that it was a struggle. When I lost my husband, I had been a homemaker for years. I had no professional experience, no safety net. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices before dawn and inputting data late into the night, to keep a roof over our heads and to ensure my daughter's future was not defined by our loss. Soft murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. This was the story they expected. But that work taught me something, I said, my voice gaining a new, hotter edge. It taught me about efficiency, about integrity, and about the deep, unmet need for reliable, dignified help in a world that is moving faster every day. So, 10 years ago, a friend and I took what little we had and we started a small business from my kitchen table. I paused, letting the anticipation build. That company is Piper Services. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw jaws drop. I saw guests turning to whisper furiously to one another. But my focus was on one man. Richard Thorne's smug expression had frozen, then shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, gray pallor. His eyes were wide with dawning, horrified comprehension. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the sheaf of papers I had printed the night before. I held the first one up. Mr. Thorne was kind enough to share some of his business insights with me at a recent dinner. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He spoke of his plan to acquire a company run with one alo. I believe his words were, all heart, no head. He mentioned its pathetic profit margins due to its focus on employee benefits. I let his own words convict him. It's interesting. Then, I continued, my voice as sharp and cold as surgical steel, as I held up the first document for all to see, that this quarterly performance review, signed by his own head of operations, commends Piper Services for providing cost-effective, streamlined solutions that saved Thorne Construction over $250,000 in potential penalty fees last year alone. A louder wave of murmurs swept the room. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. I held up the second paper. And this letter, from his project management division, explicitly thanks my exceptionally trained and motivated staff for their professionalism and integrity, calling them an invaluable asset. It seems Mr. Thorne's own logical, male-led team is quite satisfied with our emotional way of doing business. I placed the papers down and looked directly at the man who had tried to humiliate me. For the record, Thorne Construction is one of our largest and most valued clients. My hobby helps keep his empire running smoothly. The silence in the room was now absolute, thick with shock and a dawning, delicious sense of justice. People are often judged by their appearance, their gender, or their circumstances, I concluded, my voice ringing with the authority I had earned. I was dismissed as an unfortunate single mother. My company was dismissed as a sentimental hobby. But I built my business on the belief that true value is not about status or background. It is about dignity, respect, and the quality of your work. That is the lesson I taught my daughter, and I believe that is why she grew into the kind of strong, compassionate woman who could be loved by someone as wonderful as your son. Leo. I set the microphone down. For a heartbeat. There was silence. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of approval. A standing ovation that started on our side of the room and swept through the entire ballroom, engulfing even Richard Thorne's powerful guests. I walked back to my seat through the thunderous noise, my head held high, not even glancing at the broken, trembling man I left in my wake. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of surreal moments. Richard Thorne became a ghost at his own son's wedding, a pariah in a tuxedo. His powerful friends offered him clipped, uncomfortable pleasantries before melting away into the crowd. He was left alone at the head table, a king deposed in his own court. After a while, he simply vanished without a word. Anya and Leo found me near the end of the night, their faces a complex mixture of awe, relief, and residual shock. "Mom," Anya whispered, hugging me tightly. Thank you." Leo just looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound, unspoken gratitude. "What you did tonight." "Vinne," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was necessary." The fallout was faster and more brutal than I could have imagined. It wasn't just gossip, it was a corporate implosion. The story of the wedding speech that sank an empire became the stuff of local legend. A week after the wedding, Leo called me, his voice strained. "It's a catastrophe." "Vinne." Worse than I thought. The head of operations, a brilliant woman named Catherine Vance, whose report I had quoted, had resigned the Monday after the wedding. A competitor poached her immediately, and she took Thorne Construction's entire luxury condominium portfolio with her, a devastating blow. Other key employees, particularly women in management who had long endured Richard's casual sexism, saw their moment and left in droves. Clients began pulling out of contracts, citing concerns about the company's unstable leadership and toxic culture. The empire built on logic was crumbling under the weight of its founder's emotional incontinence. Richard, predictably, refused to take responsibility. He blamed a coordinated, hysterical overreaction. He tried to bully his board and his remaining clients into submission. But his power was gone, evaporated in a single, self-immolating speech. The company was in a nosedive, and the banks were getting nervous. 2 months after the wedding, my assistant buzzed my office. "Ms. Piper A. Richard Thorne is on the line. He says it's urgent." I agreed to meet him. On my turf, he arrived at the Piper Services headquarters looking 10 years older. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his diminished frame, but the arrogance in his eyes had merely hardened into a brittle shell of desperation. He didn't apologize. He launched directly into a disjointed proposal for a strategic merger. A plan where my stable, profitable company would essentially guarantee the loans he needed to survive. He was offering me a piece of his sinking ship, and he presented it as if he were doing me a favor. I let him finish. My hands steepled on my desk. Let me see if I understand. Richard, I said, my tone cool and clinical. You're proposing a partnership. Let's analyze this with logic, not emotion. Shall we? Your own preferred method. His eyes narrowed. Your company is currently facing a catastrophic loss of client confidence, brand reputation, and key personnel. Your stock, if you were public, would be worthless. Your brand is now synonymous with a public relations disaster of your own making. I leaned forward, channeling his own cold-blooded persona from that first dinner. My analysts, I said, savoring the echo of his own words, show that your quarterly projections are not just bad, they are apocalyptic. You are hemorrhaging cash and talent at an unsustainable rate. From a purely logical, profit-driven perspective, tying my company to yours would be an act of financial suicide. It would be a liability of the highest order. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city, a city my company helped to run. You once told me my business was a hobby, run with emotion. But my hobby is thriving because it is built on respect, something you have proven you fundamentally lack. Piper Services is not a charity. Richard, I cannot, in good conscience, invest in a company with such a deep, sentimental attachment to its own outdated, inefficient, and toxic leadership. I turned to face him. He was ashen, speechless. My words, his words, it had become the final nails in his corporate coffin. I had not raised my voice. I had not been emotional. I had simply used his own logic as a weapon and dismantled him with it. He never spoke to me again. A few days after our meeting, the board of Thorn Construction, facing total ruin, forced Richard's resignation. That same evening, Leo came to my house. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear for the first time in months. The board is giving me one chance, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I have 30 days to present a viable recovery plan, or they'll sell the company for parts. I can't do it alone. Vinna. The brand is toxic. The trust is gone. But with you, with Piper Services as an official partner, we could rebuild it. We could build something better. I looked at this young man, who had been put in an impossible position by his own father. I saw his integrity, his strength, and I saw my daughter, who loved him. I'll help, I said, but on two conditions. First, your father is to have no involvement, ever again. Second, we are going to reform the company's culture from the ground up. A new code of conduct, a new HR policy, and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of arrogance and bias that rotted it from the inside out. Leo nodded without hesitation. Absolutely, he said. That's the only way forward. A year later, I stood with Leo and Anya on a windy overlook, gazing down at a bustling construction site. The company, now restructured and rebranded as Thorn Piper Development, was thriving. Our first joint project was not a monument to corporate vanity, but a beautifully designed, sustainable, affordable housing community. Anya, who had graduated with honors, was now the head of their new human resources division, and her fresh, compassionate perspective had breathed new life into the once stagnant corporate culture. The atmosphere on the job site below was different. It was collaborative, energetic. We saw female engineers in hard hats conferring with project managers, a sight that would have been unthinkable under Richard's old regime. Employee morale had soared, and the best talent in the industry, people who had fled Richard's toxicity, were now coming to work for us. We had achieved the impossible. We had turned a collapsing empire into a thriving, ethical business. Richard was living in a self-imposed exile in one of his half-empty luxury condos. A bitter man who still refused to admit he was wrong. We maintained a minimal, formal distance for Anya's sake, but he was a ghost from a past we had collectively chosen to leave behind. He had paid the price for his prejudice, left with nothing but his money and his pride. Leo put his arm around Anya, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. "It's amazing, isn't it?" she said softly, looking at the homes taking shape below. "What you can build when you don't waste your energy tearing people down." I looked at them, my daughter and the wonderful man she had chosen, and saw the future. I thought of the hard road that had brought me here from a grieving widow, cleaning offices in the dark, to the co-founder of this new, hopeful enterprise. Richard Thorne believed that real value was measured in profit margins and the cold logic of numbers. But he was wrong. True worth isn't found in what you own or who you can command. It's founded in the dignity you show others, the respect you earn, and the strength to rise again. Not just for yourself, but to build a better foundation for those who come after you. That, I believe, is the only legacy that truly endures. It's a powerful feeling to know your own worth and to make sure the world sees it too. So many of us have faced moments where we were underestimated or dismissed, and finding the strength to speak your truth can change everything. If this story of finding your voice and rebuilding on your own terms resonated with you, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges. And let us know in the comments about a time you stood up for what you believe in.